Hello and welcome to the first video. In this video we're going to go over how to create a document in Finale and how to choose instruments, and I'm going to give you an overview of the user interface and the tools and the palettes, and just get you started with that. Now just keep in mind that this tutorial and the next one go along with task 1. And task 1 is essentially an assignment, although it's not graded. It's a practice assignment, and the reason I did that is I wanted to have something for us to work with that was the same thing, so that if we're both working on the same document and try to copy the same composition, we can see what kinds of issues might arise. So there's a description of it. You'll have this image in the document called task 1, and then you'll also have a bit more detail on what you're supposed to do, but basically you just have to copy this and try to make it look as close as possible. So anyway, so at this point you will have downloaded Finale 2014. I'm going to go ahead and shut my Finale down, and I'm going to reopen it. And when I do, I will get a window which will pop up in a second, hopefully. Okay, here it goes. So first of all, notice that I have Finale 2012. There haven't been great changes made recently, so I haven't upgraded to 2014 yet. There isn't a 2013 version. There's just 2012 and 2014. But if you do notice some changes in what I'm telling you versus what you see in your program, do let me know, and I'll make sure to make some corrections. Okay, so basically what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and go to the setup wizard. This will allow you to set up a document, give it a title, give it some sort of like basic shape, pick the instruments, just in very general terms. You could do that. You could just start off with the default document, but it's much more work to go from there, unless all you need to do is just do, say, a treble clef document or something very simple with one instrument or one line. So we'll go ahead and use the setup wizard. And so what we're trying to do is, once again, trying to copy this document. So as you can see, this is a piece for keyboard, and right, so we'll start off with that, and it's in G major and it's in 3/4, and it also has a tempo marking animato and a note duration indication of dotted half note equals 69. So all of that we should keep in mind while we create the document. So the first thing we'll do is we get to this window. This is where we pick our ensemble. Now there are lots of choices here with respect to what ensemble you can choose, and it's usually very standard stuff like choir and piano, bass trio, brass trio, brass quintet, brass choir, jazz band, those kinds of things. But otherwise, you'll have to create a new ensemble. You can also choose the page layout and all that basic stuff, for both the score and the part. We're going to create a score that won't have any parts, but anytime you create a score with multiple instruments, Finale automatically generates linked parts, and that's what that is for, but we'll deal with that later. And as far as the style, we'll just do the engraved style. If you were doing a jazz chart, you could do the handwritten style, but we'll just go ahead and click next, and then here we'll go to keyboards, and this is where all your keyboards are listed. We'll just pick piano, and we'll go to add. Here you can add as many. You could add 3 or 4 pianos, however many you want. You could also combine different instruments, and you can over here move the order so that this will appear on the top staff, this will appear in the one below, and it's kind of nice to do it here, and you don't have to then look around, figure out how to do it later. It's just nice to get it all done here if you can. So remove piano, and we'll just keep everything else the same. We don't need to save a new ensemble. Then we'll add a title, minuet, and we'll add a subtitle, which is a study in the arpeggio of the common record. And then it says here, close position. Okay, then our composer is the one and only J.S. Bach. Okay, keep in mind that we're trying to copy this as an exercise. We're trying to make it look as close to this as possible. Okay, so this is part of the practice. Very helpful. We don't have an arranger, we don't have a lyricist, we don't need copyright, we can just delete that. Move on to the next, and then we have a 3/4 time signature. Key will be G major, so here we can go up the sharps, or I guess up the circle of fifths, down the circle of fifths over here, and so back up to G major. Over here you can choose major or minor, but this is not really going to affect anything except transposition. If you're transposing, it'll do a better job at guessing how to transpose accidentals if you're changing to, let's say, F minor to F sharp minor or something like that. It'll do a better job at guessing which note should be sharp or double sharp. And then we want to specify an initial tempo marking. In this case it's animato, and we also want a duration, beat value, a beat tempo of 69, the dotted half note. Pickup measures, you don't have one here. If you did have one, it would be really good to do it. Take care of that here, because it is a little bit laborious to do it afterwards. You can do it afterwards, but it is kind of a pain. So, but we don't need that now. So we have 16 measures, and we click on finish. And there's our document. So the text is kind of all over the place. So once again, this is a very basic setup, but lots of things are just not in place. And this is kind of what we're going to do now. Is we're just going to deal with some of the tools that'll help us do this. We won't actually do any editing here. We will just talk about. I'll just close this video by talking about the main tool palette. I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. And we'll get into some of it later. So the two windows that pop up here, those are not necessarily going to be there when you open your document. You might find that this is not there. Any of those windows will appear under, you'll select under window. So the only one we need right now is the main tool palette. So let's go over this. Let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, that's good. Alright, so first we have the selection tool. So this is your basic selection. It's kind of handy because you can do things like click on a measure, select that, and then select basically any kind of thing. And if you actually double click on it, it'll move you, it'll automatically select the tool that you need for that, but we'll talk about that more later. Anyway, so this is a selection tool. Zoom tool, basically just a regular zoom. You click with the plus sign to zoom in, and then you press option to zoom out. And then this is the grabber. This is for you to kind of move things around only within the score. Your window stays the same, but you just kind of move your score. And then you have your your staff tool. This does a lot of different things, such as you could do things like tell finale you don't want bar lines to appear, or you don't want these rests to appear, or you don't want time signature to show up here, or all kinds of things like that. You could even have create special staves that have only 3 lines, and you can do all kinds of things. But that's basically where you do all that. And then there's a measure tool. This is where you deal with measure numbers or any kind of double bars or any kind of special dotted bar lines like that. Then you have, of course, the key signature tool, and then the time signature tool. This is simple entry. This one here is what we're going to be using to enter notes in the next tutorial. But there is another way to enter notes. Well, there are more than one, but there's the speedy entry, which we'll do it later. This is my favorite tool for entering notes because I don't play keyboard very well. So, but if you do, you could use the hyperscribe tool, which allows you to play music into Finale through a MIDI keyboard, and then Finale it'll give you a click track, and you can play along with it, and then it'll transcribe it for you. Now it'll do the best it can, because as we will see later when we talk about MIDI in more detail, notating or playing rhythm accurately is very, very difficult for us. And when I say us, I mean humans. So we don't do a good job even if we think we are. So the computer, or at least in comparison to a computer, so the computer has to take all sorts of guesses. But usually, if the music is easy, it's pretty doable. It just gets complicated if you're trying to do something harder rhythmically. But anyway, regardless, this is still pretty handy. Then there's a tuplet tool. This is going to come in handy later. There's a MIDI tool. This just allows you to edit MIDI information. In this case, we don't really need to worry about this. And to be honest with you, never use this, but it is there and can be helpful, I suppose. Then here's the Smart Shape tool. This is what you'll use to create slurs or any kind of line type thing that needs to be flexible. So it'll be attached to, say, two notes, and then if I move a measure, if one note is here and the other note is here, and then I move this measure way down here, the slur will stretch itself to automatically fit that. You don't have to do it by hand, which would be obviously crazy time consuming. But this also, many of these tools have like special features where you can create your own lines and your own kinds of things. But for the most part, this is going to be what you use for trills or slurs and hairpins, that kind of thing. And then the expression tool, this is for any kind of text that is attached to a measure, for example, like this. And it's even more powerful than that. You can have text that actually affects the measure. Like, for example, this particular text here also has a feature on it that tells Finale that the tempo of this says from here on play a dotted half note at 69. So it's text, but it can actually have some kind of impact on the music, even the playback, or not, but often it does. And anyway, this is how you do any kind of dynamic markings, or also things like pizzicato, and it can actually do key switches. It'll actually play pizzicato if it's set up that way and all that. But Finale, by the way, is not really meant to be a playback engine. I mean, it plays back and it does a good job, but it's not what you would use just to play music, right? It just plays music. It's just like a bonus feature, but what it's really intended for is to notate music. Anyway, then we have the articulation tool. So we do things like fingerings and staccato markings, all that. Lyrics tool to add lyrics, chords, clef tool, any kind of repeat signs, and first ending, second ending. This you will do from here. This is for the note mover, so for a certain special situation when you want to move notes to places where maybe they're not supposed to be. Let's say you have a note on this staff and you want to drag it over to this one without actually moving to this staff. That's kind of a strange thing, but sometimes you do see that in music. You'll have a melody that's like all the way here, and then suddenly one note jumps down here, but it's still within this layer of music. So that's what this is for. Then there's a percentage tool. This is helpful if you want to reduce the size of your score. We'll probably need to do this. Actually, you can also reduce the size of a note. And then the special tools. This is really great for fine-tuning. And this is if you do anything that is contemporary music related, you'll be using this all the time. You can create special note heads, special beams, special stems, and stretch them and take a let's say a flat sign and turn it into some other shape, whatever that you decide or you draw. So it's pretty powerful. And then there's a text tool. As you can see, when I click this activates. So that means that basically just shows you that you can now edit these from here. We'll talk about more of that later. And then here's your layout tool. This is where you do things, things like moving systems around within the page. So this is something you work a lot with at the end, right before you're going to print. And then here's your Ossia tool. This is to create those funny little measures that give you like a brief explanation sometimes, or a sample of what you might do with a certain kind of ornamentation. You'll see this in editions of like early music. You might have some kind of a note or a tune, and then there's an oscilla measure somewhere that says, well, yes, but in the original this is what's there, we corrected it to this or whatever. Then the mirror tool, I don't use this ever, but basically allows you to create twin measures, where you can have a measure here and then copy that same measure over here, and then you change this measure, and whatever you change here will change there automatically. So it's literally like a mirror. But I've never used it, which doesn't mean you shouldn't. Tempo tool, this is just to create tempo changes along the around in the middle of a piece, for example. And then the graphics tool, this is for you to add images that you create typically from outside Finale. You can use a software such as Inkscape, for example. I like that one a lot. And then you can or even a picture. Theoretically, you can have an image. A lot of times, if I have to do things like have like a squiggly line within my music for whatever reason, then I'll usually create it in a different program and then just paste it on here as an image. But you can do things like that, like squiggly lines in Finale as well. But sometimes I just choose to use a program just because maybe it's intended to be a graphics program, so obviously it's going to do make it a little better or easier. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about right now, and I'll see you on the next video.